Hello. Yesterday was day 5 of the 21 days of personal development, and the video just will not upload. I apologize for that. So I am doing it again in a lower quality video to try to get it to upload when it's not such a big file. It could be that it's the cable that is apparently broken under the sea, the internet cable. I have no idea why it's not uploading. Have tried quite a few times now, so my apologies for that. So for day 5, we did gentleness on ourselves, considering our own needs and the needs of others, and not getting angry at ourselves. When I think about those particular topics, the first thing that comes to my mind is boundaries. Boundaries are, in the most simplest form, saying no about something. There are actually 10 boundaries that Dr. Henry Cloud and Dr. John Townsend explain as the personal boundaries that each one of us have control over. And I'm going to list them for you quickly. Dr. Townsend explains that there's always something that you can do. There's always a choice you can make. There's something that you can do about this, whatever this happens to be. This is the quote that we also used in day 1. You're never helpless. Now, the reason he says that is because there are 10 boundaries that each one of us have complete and utter control over in our own lives. And these are what those 10 boundaries are. Your behaviors, your talents and resources, your desires, which includes the goals that you set for yourself, your love, your limits, your choices, your attitudes and beliefs, your feelings, your thoughts, and your values. Now, Dr. Henry Cloud and Dr. John Townsend are renowned psychologists in the United States. They have written numerous best-selling books, including the New York Times best-selling book, Boundaries. And they are considered experts in the field of working with boundaries. Now, if you would like to find out more specifically about their books and about the resources that they have available that people can access, they have a website, www.boundariesbooks.com. And on that website, they have numerous articles that you can read free of charge. They also have a free newsletter that you can sign up to get daily boundaries tips. And I highly recommend their work. I highly recommend the resources that they have available on YouTube, on that particular website. And if you just Google them, you'll also find a lot of free resources. They've done an enormous amount of speaking about boundaries as well. And I encourage you to even go onto YouTube and actually just type in the name Henry Cloud or John Townsend and the word boundaries, and you'll get a lot of speaking resources that have been uploaded to YouTube that they've done, and it is very good. So we can understand that we always have a choice. Those 10 things are things that we completely control and that we can do something about. So when it comes to considering our own needs and the needs of others, the thing that comes up there for me is respect. Because just like we want people to respect our the fact that we are in control of our own choices, that we are in control of our own feelings and our own behaviors, our own values, the things we desire, the things we love, we need to be giving that respect as well. So when we talk about considering the needs of others, I think that respecting the needs of others is another very good way to phrase that. To respect that just like we have complete control over those 10 things, other people have complete control over those 10 things in their own lives. And boundaries are not trying to control people. Boundaries are actually a consequence that we set up. We say, I need to be in an environment where people are respecting my body And if the people around me are not respecting my body, are making rude jokes about my body, or are touching me in ways that I don't want them to, I will leave the room. So we set up a need that we have, then we set up consequences. We'll leave the room, and we can't influence or determine or control the behavior of the people that we are putting this boundary up with. We have absolutely nothing to do with what they decide to do. The only person that we have control over is ourselves. So the boundary, the consequence that we put up, it's actually a boundary that we put up for ourselves. In other words, we can control our own choices and behavior. So if there is a boundary that we feel we don't want that in our lives or in our environment, we can decide on a consequence, not speaking to those people, or leaving the room, trying to find a new job, trying to distance ourselves physically or emotionally from people. And the boundary itself, that consequence that we decide we're going to set up, it is something that we ourselves implement. So the boundary is something that we put on ourselves. We tell ourselves, I don't want that in my life, so I'm not going to speak to those people. I don't want that in my life, so I'm going to leave the room. I don't want that in my life, so I'm not going to attend functions where that's happening. I don't want that in my life, so I'm not going to watch those programs. I don't want that in my life, so I am not going to attend that particular gathering. And in the context of the coronavirus, we don't want to catch the virus. So the boundary that we put in place is we want to adhere to social distancing. And I heard a very nice explanation yesterday, physical distancing rather than calling it social distancing, because it is actually physical distancing that we want between people, which means that if we want to put that boundary into our lives, we have to decide, okay, when I am going to the shop, if someone comes into my space, I'll ask them to please give me some physical distance. And if they don't do that, the consequence is I will remove myself and go and stand in a different queue, or go and wait until that person has finished and then get back into the queue, or move to a different part of the store. So the only person who has control over those consequences, over implementing consequences of boundaries, is you yourself. And that's something that people often don't understand about boundaries. It's not trying to control other people. It's not trying to enforce something on other people. It's not a means of manipulating other people or anything else like that. It's entirely about your own decisions, your own behavior, your own actions in response to what you don't want in your life. Okay. The second really good quote that I'd like to share with you, also from Dr. Henry Cloud and Dr. John Townsend, is the most basic boundary setting word is no. It lets others know that we exist apart from them and that we are in control of ourselves. So if you have a piece of paper with you, I want you to jot down some thoughts about this. You can pause the video after the question and give yourself a little bit of time to write it down. What does it mean that you exist apart from others? How does that play out in regard to boundaries? It means that you're in control of your own feelings. It means that you're in control of your own thoughts. It means that you have control over your own choices, your own behaviors, the limits that you want to put in place. It means that you're in control of your own talents and resources. You're in control of your love. One of the ways that we realize that we haven't put a healthy boundary in place is when we're feeling anger and or resentment. Anger and resentment are fairly sure signs that a boundary of yours, something that you don't want in your life, has been violated, and that you yourself didn't put up that wall. Make sure that that boundary was there, and that you communicated it, and that you enforced it. And when you don't do that, and you actually allow people to come past a boundary that is important to you, but that perhaps you haven't communicated, that you haven't put up in place, that you haven't held the boundary, that is often when we feel anger and resentment. So if you think about some boundaries in your life that you feel you should have, that you maybe don't have, what are the emotions that you have around those? There is a very, very good chance that it will be anger or resentment that you start feeling when those healthy boundaries aren't in place. And that is a sure sign that you need to look at where your boundary isn't put in place, and you need to put that boundary up and enforce it. And one of the key things about healthy boundaries is that you're not doing this, as I say, to control or to in any way hurt or manipulate other people. You're doing this purely to protect yourself. You're being supportive of yourself, of your own needs. And so you put up the boundary because you need that in place. And then the self-discipline comes from you to hold that boundary, to let the consequences happen that you've said will happen, and to actually have the self-discipline to follow through. So if you say, if that happens, I will leave the room, you have to do it every single time. So boundaries are about you, and they're about protecting you, and they're about having the self-discipline and the self-love, the self-compassion to keep those boundaries in place. So you only put a boundary up when it is really important, when it is something that you really need in your life. And when you put that boundary up, because you're protecting yourself, you need to really understand that it is a boundary about loving yourself. And it's also a boundary about loving the other person. Because in order to continue a good relationship with the other person, you don't want to have anger and resentment getting in the way of you and the other person. You want to have a good relationship. So when you put a boundary up, you're doing it out of love for yourself, but you're also doing it out of love for the relationship, because you don't want any of those negative emotions in the relationship. So you put the boundary up, you keep the boundary, you make sure that you implement it if it's necessary, and you do it in love. If a boundary is not done in love, it's not a healthy boundary. So the last quote I'd like to share with you, it's from Dr. Brené Brown, another person that you can Google and look for on YouTube.